me today on Exegetically Speaking is Kevin Grasso, who is co-founder and CEO of Biblingo, which is a fabulous way of learning and kind of staying up and practicing your Greek. Kevin, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, David.
First of all, tell us, who is Kevin Grasso?
Yeah, so I am technically, well, I'm finishing up my PhD. I'm about to be done with it in
Great.
Hebrew at
Congratulations.
Hebrew University. Thank you. So I just need to, basically get it signed. And then I am the founder of Biblingo, or co-founder with Nick. And we basically just try to teach people the biblical languages using more modern linguistic approaches. And really, for me, more broadly as a scholar, I'm trying to bring the field of linguistics into the biblical languages much more than it is now. So my degree is in Hebrew from Hebrew University, but all of my classes were in the linguistics department, and I basically have done a deep dive into linguistic theory to try to apply it to exegesis.
And if people want to know more about Biblingo, how would they get that information?
Yeah, biblingo.org is our website. You can basically find everything you want to know about us there. And we also have a podcast, the Biblical Languages Podcast.
Well, we're gonna do a separate podcast on biblingo.org and what you guys are doing, dive a little bit deeper than what we're able to do now. But today we're going to talk about a really interesting phrase that has been debated for some time, is the little phrase pistis Christou. Is it faith of Christ or faithfulness of Christ, faith in Christ, or is it something else? And I think you have the something else here. Tell us a little bit about this. This is Greek. I mean, I know your program is in Hebrew, but you're doing Greek here.
Yeah. So I don't discriminate between Greek and Hebrew. I like them both.
Good.
Yeah. So basically, this is one of the ways in which I have I'm trying to bring in linguistic theory into an exegetical problem. The pistis Christou debate is a very large debate, and it's been weighed in by many scholars. But there have been really two predominant views on this phrase, that it means either faith in Christ or faithfulness or faith of Christ.
Right.
And my argument in my paper is that both of those are incorrect, and that it actually should be understood as something like the Christ faith.
The Christ faith. Okay.
Right.
Unpack that a little bit for us. When you say faith, let's start with that as kind of the main noun there. What does that faith mean? Is it trust? Is it allegiance to? What is it?
Yeah. So in my article, what I argue is that it's some sort of like system of thought. And I took a little bit of flack for that because I wasn't as precise maybe as I really could have been in that paper, just because of length. But basically the idea is that it's something like a message that can be adhered to and that calls you to do something, right? So the word itself can have a broad range of meaning. So our question is, what in these particular contexts does that word mean, right? So sometimes you have this word meaning something like belief, right? It absolutely does sometimes.
Belief in something, yeah.
Right, belief in something, or even belief that something is true.
Oh,
the word itself isn't specified to always mean loyalty, right? Or to always mean propositional belief, right? And so the idea is that in these cases, my argument is that it's best understood as something closer to a message or a system that you can adopt and that absolutely changes your whole life, right? But this system is centered around the Messiah.
Okay. And you take Christ to mean the Jewish Messiah at that point.
Right, exactly.
So is it like Christ is sort of the content of that system of faith?
Exactly.
Okay.
So again, it's something, it's in English, it's closer to something like distinguishing between the Christian faith and the Jewish faith, right? If you want to use that sense of the word faith, right? The Christ faith is something that can be adopted, and then as something that can be adopted, it can change your life.
Well, let's take that to a particular passage, and the one you selected is in Galatians chapter 3. Give us a little background to that particular passage, and then take us into that phrase and how your way of thinking about this passage really sets the tone for what Paul is trying to say here.
Yeah, so I think in all of these passages, what they have in common is this movement in, it's very, historical, right? It's, okay, the law was in play at some point and it was doing something. And then in came the faith, right?
Yeah, right.
And this is the part of the key to the whole argument is that when you have certain verbs that are used with this idea of faith. So if you read, in verse 22, ala su neklesen he grafe ta panta hypo hamartian hina he epangelia ek pisteos Iesu Christu dothe tois pisteusin. So the idea is that the hina clause, right, the promise from, and then we have our phrase, right, might be given to those who pisteusin, right? And the idea is that there was a time before where the scriptures imprisoned everything under sin, right? And now there's a new time, right? And then in verse 23, we have protude elthein ten pistin, right? So before faith's coming. And the idea is that basically it wouldn't make sense from a linguistic standpoint to say that, like in verse 23, before faith's coming would refer to Jesus' faith or to faith in Jesus.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, I think that's one of the strongest parts of your argument here. Before faith came. Well, what faith?
Exactly.
Right.
And so in this case, when you have a noun without an argument, right? There's nothing that goes with it. The idea is that you have to have some sort of in this sense, or in this verse, it has to mean something like message or system to be adopted or something, right, that comes into the world and changes things. And you have other examples of this. This isn't the only case, but in the immediate context, we have our phrase Christu, and we also have this use of pistin that is very, very clearly referring to something coming and something that is not a quality of Jesus and not a quality in ourselves, but something external that we can adopt and that might change us.
So how would you translate then verses 22 and 23? I mean, with your idea of Christ's faith as this system of belief that is to be adopted.
Right. So I would say, but the scriptures have imprisoned everything under sin in order that the promise of the Jesus Christ faith, or that's associated with the Jesus Christ faith, might be given before faith came. So then we have Galatians 3:23, right? And we have protude elthein ten pistin. That phrase before is really just before the faith came, referring back to the Jesus Christ faith that came with a certain promise.
Yeah. And there is a coming faith that is to be revealed, right? The faith that is to come, that is to be revealed. I think that refers back to the Christ faith at that point.
Right, exactly. And so it's not to say, again, that objective genitive people or subjective genitive people are apology. It's to say that in this particular case, it's not the best reading of the word pistis.
And you'd have to go almost, I guess, verse by verse to see where this kind of phrase occurs and how it's used at that point. So if they want to read your article, how can they do that, your article that you've written recently?
Yeah, it's actually open access. So you can just go to the Journal for the Study of the New Testament. You can find it there. You can look up my name or the third view of Pistis Christu, and it should be fairly easy to find.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin Grasso, for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you learned too much today and your head is hurting, there is one sure cure. That is to share this podcast with a friend. If you've never visited Wheaton College, I hope you'll make plans to do so. We have a wonderful campus all year round. And if biblical languages are your fancy, check out the MA and the BA program at Wheaton College. You can go to wheaton.edu, look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. This is the day you want to do it, right? If you have questions or comments, if you just want to be in touch, please email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks to all those who make this podcast possible. You know who you are. Until next time, thanks for listening.